I went to Columbia in the fall of 2001. And after I got there, I agreed to give a series of presentations to alumni groups around the Mid-Atlantic region. And that January, I found myself driving from New York City down the Turnpike to Philadelphia to speak to the Eastern Pennsylvania Alumni Group. It was snowing. I got there, was at a Holiday Inn, got into the parking lot, got into the hotel, found the room, set up much like this. My presentation was to begin at 8 o'clock. But by 8:15, there was only one other person in the room. I suggested I should go ahead with my talk, and he agreed. I gave my talk. It was a good talk that night. I asked if he had any questions. He said, no, I have no questions. I sat down in the chair, and I thought about this terrible ride I had back to New York City. And I said, well, I'm glad that you were here. I got to get back on the road. He says, no, you don't. You're going to stay. I said, no. I've got meetings in the morning. I got a terrible ride back to the city. I'm out of here. He says, no, you're going to stay. I said, you don't understand. I've got to get back to New York tonight. He says, no, you don't understand. I'm the second speaker. And so I'm always thankful when an audience shows up. So I've used this punchline, if you will, of virtuality serving a user community wherever they are, but maintaining that expertise, that virtuosity, and that commitment to the public interest that we who work in libraries have for centuries been embracing. But having recognized those values, I also think we have to continuously raise the question, the people who work with us in a campus community, students and researchers, do they in fact still need us? I decided that was a boring title. And so I came up with some alternatives. You can't count the apples in the seed, which is a Ken Kesey quote, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he's basically telling us that the future is really unpredictable. We can look at all the trends, and we will, but we've got to accept a certain amount of ambiguity as we really build and advance that future. Pioneers need frontiers. I believe librarians are pioneers, and we're constantly establishing new frontiers in our collaboration with students and researchers. And I think new models of teaching and learning and new models of research have forced us to think very carefully about the traditional methodologies and the new ways of serving that community. The Trompe-l'oeil Research Library of the Future. You might remember that as an architectural term, trick of the eye. When you look at a building and you see something, but it's really not there, it's only on the surface. And I think in some ways we are creating a Trompe-l'oeil library with a lot of the trappings that people expect, shelves of books, desks, carols, but they don't explain what's really going on in terms of the services that that library is providing to the academic community. Chaos breeds life. This is from The Education of Henry Adams. It's preceded by order breeds habit. Chaos breeds life. And I believe a library that is full of life is one that is going to be much more successful. One that's sort of mixing things up a little bit in order to move things forward. And this one, my last one, sometimes a scream is better than a thesis. Librarians have had a habit of documenting things and writing long reports and getting involved in 2 or 3 year strategic planning exercises, which is a waste of time. And therefore, I think we need to sometimes just scream what we're about and talk about that with the students and faculty and researchers who we serve. I believe that this is also bundled up in what historically, I'm going to come back to this concept of library cooperation, where we've had sort of a tradition of kumbaya, the sort of holding hands and doing things together, interlibrary loan, cataloging, collective collection development, moving into more systemic partnerships and more radical approaches to how we partner with each other, with our campus community, and with other information organizations. So having said that, I think it's important to think about those things which are truly having an impact on the work of the academic research library. I like to note that trends are really important. So important that in 1997, there were 17,316 people in the United States working as Elvis impersonators. By 2017, 20 years later, that number had increased to 65,206. And if that trend continues, by the year 2027, 1 out of 3 people in this room will be working as a... So look around and see who that'll be. So we are familiar with all these things. Our users are bringing extraordinary expectations governed by their work with video games and interactions with all types of online tools and capabilities. We, I think, have to be responsive to those expectations. We run very inefficient, redundant library operations. Why do 3,600 academic libraries in North America have to have cataloging departments, acquisitions departments, preservations departments, digitization departments? Can we not find a way to integrate that work in a more effective way so we can free resources to work on the new areas of responsibility that we have? We have aging service paradigms. I still walk into many libraries and I find reference desks. There were 27 reference desks at Columbia when I got there in 2001, and there's none now, because we recognize that the way we interact with our students, our faculty, and researchers has got to be reshaped and rethought. And librarians don't need to sit behind a desk waiting for someone to come beg for help, because Columbia students won't do that, but being out in the classroom, in the laboratory, in the academic department, at the bedside, in the hospital, are increasingly ways in which we are becoming partners in that service environment. Increasing emphasis on unique resources. When all the libraries, from the smallest community college to the largest research library, can license all of these e-journals and e-books and e-resources, their collections begin to look very much alike. And it's those unique resources that become distinctive and definitional for what a research library is, in my view. The need to really aggregate and achieve much more scale and much more network effect by working together and building the technological platforms that allow us to do that. And then the whole notion that it's all about the apps. It's all about the tools that we work on together to build that collective innovation. And then there's lots of other things that are clearly going on in the academic library community, whether it be the mobility of the user, whether it be the increasingly focus on open content, not published through standard channels, but increasingly available in an open way. The economic context, where we do not have the resources that we used to depend on. And our budget increases, if not our budget cuts, are forcing us to think very creatively about how to make hard decisions about those resources. And I think the most important thing for me is this concept of mutability, the sense of constant change. The things are constantly revolving and moving in the environment in which we work. And our ability to understand that change and to manage that change and to build our capacity to serve through that change, I think, is going to be our increasing challenge. But many of these things, I think, will be very familiar to you in your work in libraries. A lot of this is being driven by new technologies. EDUCAUSE and the New Media Coalition each year publish a list of the technologies that they think are going to have the greatest impact over the next several years in higher education. Well, I collapsed the last 2 years of technology observations that they made into this screen and the next screen. And again, you'll see many, many familiar things in terms of the role of mobiles and tablets, geo-everything that's going on across all the disciplines, the importance of big data and linked data, the Internet of Things and the increasing importance of smart objects, which link the physical world with information. Everything that we buy, from our car to our refrigerator to our telephone, is smart in some way. And how do we build a capacity to get those to work for us in important ways and translate that into the academic teaching, learning, and research environment? And I think we have some wonderful opportunities to do some new things. The so-called revolutionary MOOC, the massive open online courses, which I think have been relatively stabilized now in terms of the role they play in higher education, but it does demonstrate the increasing importance of online learning and blended learning as an important part of the educational experience at all colleges and universities. Games as learning tools. The importance of 3D printing as a service capacity. So there are lots of technologies which are impinging upon the higher education community, for which I believe the library has a very central role to embrace, to implement, to service, to introduce, to educate within the communities, in our campus communities. All of this, I think, is driving what I call a very schizophrenic vision of what the library is. We are legacy. We can't make all those books go away. We may move many of them into off-site shelving, but we still have this responsibility for these important legacy materials. We are an infrastructure. We're an infrastructure of content. We're an infrastructure of space. We're an infrastructure of expertise. And we need to make sure that that infrastructure is solid. We are a repository, making sure that this stuff is going to be there, not just today, but 50, 100, 500 years from now. We're a portal, sort of a gateway, helping people to find the information that they need. We used to use a term in the 1960s called reader's advisor. And that concept, I think, is still relevant, where we are hopefully presenting the best information to the users that we serve. Platform, the technologies that we deliver, the apps, the software applications, the enterprise, the recognition that we have the ability, we have assets that we're not turning into resources, whether it be content that can be published, whether it be space that could be leased. I think it's an exciting possibility. And then the public interest. We're the people who are in Washington. We're the people who are in state capitals fighting for a lot of the information policy issues that are central to the ability of our students and faculty to do their work. So it's hard to communicate this suite of different visions of what we are to the communities that we serve. So who are our users? Who's out there? Well, we always thought in terms of students, faculty, and researchers. Clearly, the administration is one of the constituencies that we need to care about, particularly in these tough economic times. We serve also, in many ways, a community. The Columbia community is embracing New York. I'm sure Washington University is embracing some of St. Louis. The working professionals, people who have come through graduate programs, law, business, and other fields, who turn back and expect support and service and capacity, collection capacity. Alumni and donors, who we have largely ignored over the years and have really come, I think, to embrace in a much more effective way. And then when we put content up on the web, the world becomes our user community. At any institution, when you publish a digital collection, you know you're going to start getting inquiries and reference questions coming in from all over the globe. And we need to be prepared to serve that diversity of users who depend on us. And we intersect with our users in very interesting ways. It used to be the physical spaces. People came into our libraries and that's where we worked with them. But now we've got the web, they're in our electronic collections, they're in our services all over the campus, they're using our apps, our technologies. We are, as I said, in the classrooms, in the laboratories, at the bedside. We're collaborating with other institutions so that we're intersecting with faculty and students at other places, not just the ones who are resident on our own campus. And we've sort of this trite, but I still think very valuable mantra of anyone, anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And I think that continues to drive what we are and what we do in service to our communities. We've not done a very good job learning about and understanding the communities that we serve. We've done some surveys, we've done some counts, we've done some focus groups. We're now doing more sort of anthropological, observational type studies. We're beginning to do some comparative work across institutions, benchmarking so that we can understand what quality is and how we line with that quality. Some experimentation, but very little. We don't understand how to create control groups so that we truly understand how something is working. We involve our users in the work of the library, helping us look at new applications, new technologies to develop them. Sometimes we work with publishers and technology vendors to prototype some of their new products. But I still think the most important experience that I have is that aha moment. When you're working with somebody across a table, in a classroom, over the web, in email, and something goes off, and you say, I just now understand what the problem is and how I can better serve the students and faculty at this place. Our users want a lot of things. Charles Kuralt, the late newscaster, once noted that thanks to the interstate highway system in the United States, I can travel from New York to San Francisco and see absolutely nothing. The infrastructure is important, but our users tell us they want more and better content, they want access wherever they are, they want convenience, they want to do things they've never been able to do before, they want to manage their cost, they want to participate in those information environments, they just don't want it delivered to them. Everyone's focused on individual and organizational productivity, and we want to control that information environment in which we work in. We need to understand these expectations and be prepared to organize our collections and services and our technologies such that they deliver and support these user expectations. We want technology everywhere. I mean, Wi-Fi has become sort of the evaluation tool that everyone uses. If I can't get into Wi-Fi and it doesn't work, then this place stinks. They have no idea what they're doing with technology. I want information when I need it, not sort of thrown at me all the time. I don't want any lines. I want all web-based services. I want to experiment. I want sort of technology sandboxes where I can play with technology. I want privacy. I want you to create a potential library for me to have social success, where I can meet with people and talk with people and exchange ideas with people. Yes, I'd never heard the word information fluency as a student, but you tell me that's important. And so I'm willing to listen to you and to work with you to grow in my understanding of how to evaluate information. The most pressing question that comes up at Columbia is, why did you cut off access to all of those electronic resources after I graduated? And how do we build that postgraduate access capability? A number of institutions, I don't know if you have actually licensed a lot of content specifically for alumni and donor communities. And that has been hugely valuable. We did it at Hopkins in 1996, just when the beginning electronic resource databases were being published. So ultimately, where I think we end up is these are the things that we should be focused on. It's the soft but critically important areas of success. Are you making me, a student and faculty member at Washington University, St. Louis, or other institution, are you making me successful? Are you enabling me to be happy? Are you creating the conditions where I can be productive, and I can make progress, and I can build relationships, and I can have positive experiences, and I can have an impact in my world? How do we draw a line between what we do in the library and these human expectations that our users bring to their campus experience? So we've spent a lot of time building digital libraries where we have traditionally focused on quality equaling content. We now know that in the digital library environment, it's quality equals content plus functionality. It's not just my ability to access it, it's my ability to use it and reuse it and apply it in educational and research environments. And it's not just the published and the licensed content, which I maintain is probably still our largest digital library, but the primary content, our special collections, if you will, that we are digitizing and publishing to the world. More and more open web content. I'm going to come back to this issue because I think it's critically important. Institutional content, archives, if you will, institutional campus archives, research data. All of this digital content does not sit on its own as text. We know it's multimedia. We know that it's integrated with services and that it is embedded with software tools, that functionality. So when we worry about preserving this stuff, we don't just preserve the content. We need to make sure that it's still usable going forward. And all of that application and functionality and multimedia capacity that's bundled up in that digital content is in fact available. I'm sorry. I have a very loose finger, so if I do that again, you have to yell at me. And therefore, it's not just a matter of holding the content. We need to make sure that it continues to be accessible, it's secure, and that we're caring for it. When 9/11 hit, we lost huge amounts of stored archives, physical print archives, all over lower Manhattan. And when we had the hurricane several years ago, materials that were stored in basements were lost. We need to migrate that same concept to the digital environment, where I think we are basically failing in taking care of the digital electronic record that we and publishers and the world is creating. So there's lots of stuff that never existed in text or in print or in analog form. And these are obvious examples, whether it's the licensed stuff. And I would note that the commercial and academic publishers last year put out 250,000 new books. The independent publishers put out 250,000 new books. 500,000 new books were self-published. Most of us are focused on the commercial and academic stuff. We're not spending a whole lot of time in collecting and preserving the independent and self-published stuff, whether it's in print or electronic. But think of all the e-video and e-audio, the digital government materials, the online learning content that's being created, research data, social media. I mean, the Library of Congress tried to wrap its mind and its capacity around Twitter and still doesn't know what to do. E-archives. We obtained the papers of Mary Baraka a couple of years ago at Columbia. In addition to his paper, he gave us 15 years of email on hard drives with 7 different email programs. What do we do with that? I mean, that's probably the most important part of that archive. Websites, billions and billions of web documents. We have zero control over this content. And this is where the world's history is being written, on the web. Yet we have no control over it. It appears today, it's going tomorrow. We have no record that that revolutionary group in Tibet that was taken down by the Chinese government ever existed. Think of the multitude of examples. And there's more. All the visual images. I just posted, several thousand photos from a recent trip to Russia. They're really good. You may want them. Spatial data, software applications, video games, medical data, RSS news feeds. I watch about 250 RSS feeds a day. Visualization, and it just goes on and on and on. And why is this important? Because you wrote a paper, right? And in that paper, you included in your footnotes, in your evidence, 6 references to web documents or websites. And a year later, after you published that paper, I read it. I said, really interesting. I'm going to go out and look at this because I want to see how she came to these ideas. They're gone. I can't find them. You made it up. I know. That's the problem we're facing. It's the integrity of the scholarly process. As more and more of the record that's being cited and used as evidence in scholarly work can no longer be found and rechecked or protected from being changed, we have a serious, serious problem. And it's also, if the primary resources are gone, how do I investigate this time in our history? How do I write about what's going on in the world if I don't have the full evidence? And I'm going to come back to this concept of repository chaos. Where is this stuff being put? It's being put all over the place. And that's part of the problem that we're facing with this born digital content. The repository chaos. We used to be confident that when somebody published something, they put it in the publisher repository. We used to call it a book, or sometimes we called it a journal article. But now, think about what the scholars at this university or your colleges do. They put it in discipline repositories, they put it in the campus's institutional repository, they put it in format repositories, and so they put it up on their own personal websites, and governments sometimes require them to put it up. There are some countries around the world that require national repositories. So it's a mess in terms of of where this stuff is being put. And sometimes it's put in all of these places. Which one is the copy of record? Which one is going to be preserved? Which one's not going to be changed? Which one is going to be cited in future research? It's a really tough area. And therefore, culling out one piece and talking about the continuing importance and relevance of the library to students, faculty, and researchers is this whole area of big data, where we know that we have federal and funding agency mandates that says, you, researcher, I've given you a grant. Not only do you have to make your papers accessible, but you have to preserve your research data. And therefore, these things are massive. They're unstructured very often. Scholars want to be able to extract it. They want to share it with their colleagues around the world because they're collaborating as part of research teams. They want to use it for visualization and simulation type presentations. And this long-term preservation is not something that they fully understand. We did a survey at Columbia maybe 7 years ago in which we went around to researchers at all the different schools of the university, and we said, can you show us where you're storing your research data? What? Can you show us where you're storing your research data? Oh, I think I have it in the bottom drawer here on a couple disks. This is not secure, and therefore the research record as being captured in these digital formats, also very often multimedia. Think of biological research, environmental research. It's not just numbers, it's not just text. There's a lot of complex content that's bundled up in it. We also have these meta issues that digital libraries have created. I think we have from time immemorial, but certainly after the USA Patriot Act, we have this major concern about mass surveillance. That when we go out on the web, what we do, what we've left there, what track we've left is being collected and monitored. We've had all kinds of big company, big government agency security meltdowns. Concerns about even the data that's been collected and preserved getting lost. We have this issue of network neutrality, which is being fought in Congress, whether there should be fast tracks, preferred tracks for some people who are politically connected and who can afford it to have better access and response off the internet than those who are poor and those who don't have those political connections. And then the corporate control. We've given over search. We no longer own search in the library. Who owns search? Okay. So these are meta issues that we need to be very concerned about. We've, as I said, been kumbayaing for a long time, and there's lots of forums and platforms and areas that we have been working together. You can read them on the screen. We're seeing more reaching out to the cultural community, more partnership between libraries, museums, and archives. And we're also seeing increasing interest in public-private partnerships. So the Google Book Digitization Project is an example where they put up the bucks and libraries were able to convert and digitize millions and millions of books now available openly and being able to be searched, indexed through HathiTrust. So lots of possibilities in collaboration. What I'm recommending is that we need to not set that aside, but move beyond that and really begin to look at more radical approaches. Centers for excellence. Why does everyone have to do the same? Why does everyone have to be a center for excellence? Why can't we have complementary work where we can really build deep capacity and invest deep resources and share more and more of that capacity with each other? Why does the mass production work of our library have to always be done by every library? Why do we build institutional infrastructures when we should be building collective, national infrastructures? And when we launch a new initiative, why don't we bring partners into that conversation? I think collaboration needs to be evaluated as carefully and rigorously as institutional work. So we have to say, is this collaboration producing quality, productivity, and innovation? And we constantly have to be asking those questions when we build these new approaches. The other area that we recognize is everything that we touch now in the work of libraries, in teaching, learning, and research, is increasingly bumping up against information policy. People don't think about libraries as working in state capitals, in Washington, in Geneva, on these tough issues. These are the things that we have focused on. We have been fighting the intellectual freedom wars since someone tried to ban the first book in a library. And we still have that problem. Issues of privacy around being simply out on the web and knowing that what we're doing and what we're looking at is being observed. And all the other things. And the one that I've been most involved in over the years has been fighting the copyright wars. I believe that this is another area crying out for collaboration, because I think there's hope, power, and the potential for action, legislative, legal, policy action, when we actually build political coalitions and we work together and understand how hardball politics really works. And you have a tremendous example of that in Kansas City right now, around issues of civil liberty and censorship. Digital content is not well supported by our current copyright regime. The law is out of sync with technology and the way our users behave. Orphan works, an important concept in copyright law. It's basically a work that we know is still in copyright, but we have no idea who owns the copyright. There's no mother or father, if you will, that we can turn to say, can I use your work? Can I use it for this purpose? Therefore, it's an orphan. Licensing trumps copyright. In a print world, copyright clearly applies. But when we license a database of content from a publisher, the license and contract that we assign is what governs what we're able to do and what our users are able to do. It's a whole shift in the legal framework as we build more and more of our content digital licensing based as opposed to print based. US law is very important because we have built over the decades exceptions in the law for libraries and archives, things that allow us to do interlibrary loan, to preserve materials, to allow users to make copies of materials. Fair use, which is this wonderfully ambiguity is our friend concept within American copyright law, gives us the ability to make case-by-case choices in terms of what we're able to do. And the international context is very different. I think this is the area of great concern over the next several years, because there's clear pressure in Congress to rewrite the American copyright law and to align it more with international provisions. And that's a great risk to us. So the library community needs to be prepared for that war. We've also seen very different thinking about library staffing. We have professionals with diverse academic backgrounds. We have a wide range of new professional assignments. And I'm not talking about hiring librarians to do, non-librarians to do librarian work. What I'm saying is the work that we do as libraries in terms of fundraisers and systems engineers and web developers and space planners, and you can go on and on and on and on and on through your fingers and toes, and you'll come up with a huge number of different types of expertise that we employ in libraries. We also have seen support staff and students play in really in larger roles. I would argue what librarians were doing when I started in the field in 1972 largely is being done now by students. It's a very interesting shift. And we have built, thankfully, much messier and fluid organizations. Too much hierarchy, too much bureaucracy, too much moving stuff up the information across and back down. And therefore I think it's very important that we have mavericks, maverick units and maverick people within the organization to push us and shove us in these important new directions. So therefore, somebody asked me, Jim, when you interview someone, what are you looking for? What are the qualities you want, Jim? And so I created a list. And here's the things that when I talk to someone for a job, I'm not necessarily expecting to bring all of this, but I certainly am looking for the gaps in my organizational capacity and expertise, and I'm going to hire to those gaps. And I'm really looking to have a full complement of this suite of capacities and skills and attitudes and approaches within the library organization. I believe that this is increasingly important as we move forward. We all can't have the same expertise. We've got to have a diversity of capacity in order to do the job that I think we are being expected to do. We also are marketing things in new ways. Clearly, we need to take what we have and what we do and make sure that the faculty and students who are at our university are getting it and receiving it. But we also need to look at what are the opportunities to move that content into new markets, to extend our capacity. And are there new products that we should be developing, new services, if you will, for the people on our campus? And do those new services fit into those new markets? We tend to all look at that first one and focus so much of our resources and energy on that first piece of the puzzle, when I think the other three are increasingly important to our survival and our relevance within the academic community. Our institutions, our universities, our governments, those who fund us, are asking very hard questions. We need to be much more focused on accountability and assessment. Are our users satisfied? Are we penetrating our markets? Are we producing success, impact? Is what we're doing cost effective? As we build systems, are we doing it for usability? And can we just forget about ROI, return on investment? Because we don't know how to do it in a library context. And we screw it up all the time, and government people and business people see right through those presentations when we say, oh, my public library circulated 50,000 CDs last year, and if the people in my community had to buy them at $10 each, we saved them, what, $500,000? That makes no sense. It's just not the way you demonstrate impact and value. We need much more subjective, if the right, what's the word I'm looking for? Not data-driven, but qualitative, thank you. Qualitative measures about how we evaluate our work. Space, I talked about trompe-l'oeil. This is where I think we have the most exciting opportunities. We're one of the biggest real estate people on campus. You're renovating your library here. We're doing a lot of rethinking about how those use trends and how those other technologies that we're observing, how do they transform library space into learning space, social space, collaborative space, and how do we build for flexibility and adaptability so we don't redo this 10, 20 years from now, we do it again 2 to 3 years from now. That's scary, but that's what it is. We need to have that flexibility in order to accomplish that. So I think it's very much an issue of innovation. Are we systematically applying new knowledge and new resources to those goods and services? Are we thinking enough about market? Are we thinking enough about value? How do we make our users more successful and accomplished in what they do? And are we bringing solutions to the campus community? Not just problems, not just resource deficiencies, but are we bringing solutions to the president, to the provost, to the deans, to the faculty and students? I would argue that evolutionary change, incremental change is inadequate. We've got to have much more disruptive and discontinuous approaches to what we do. It means that we have to change in our structure, what we are and what we do. We have to change the way people see us, our appearance, how we are viewed and how we are understood. And then we have to change in character or condition, how we do it. To me, these are the key elements of transformation, and all of them require our attention. So, how many of you remember the movie History of the World Part 1? Mel Brooks. Great movie, right? And so he ran through history. So I'm going to run through academic library history real fast. So I would argue before 1950, before the war, if you will, there are only a few academic libraries that we would classify as true academic libraries. It was an exclusive club, if you will, of institutions that in fact had that larger capacity. But after the war, we had the government make the decision to invest research dollars in higher education. We had a larger look at the world. We became a global institution, colleges and universities. We had this massive growth in student bodies and therefore a massive growth in the number of colleges and universities. And I would argue the libraries also went through this period of popularization where more and more institutions producing more and better libraries at colleges and universities. Then we went into this period of discord. We had economic challenges in the early 1970s. We had OCLC appear, and suddenly we had to stop doing things locally. We had to do them together. We had technology entering the library. We had staff unions that were negotiating contracts. It was a rough period from 1970 to 1990 when we really made that shift, I think, from being an analog institution to being a technology-based institution. And it was a challenging period. I call this the period of decadence. We sort of got it right, we figured it out, and suddenly we had all this electronic stuff. I was involved in 1995 in the conception and the organization and implementation of Project Muse. And Muse now is like, you ask a student, what's at the library? They say Project Muse, right? And so it's a wonderful period in which we were able to expand in really substantive ways the amount and quality of content and functionality that we could deliver to our community. You didn't have to come in and look through a bunch of indexes. You didn't have to come in and look at a card catalog. You didn't have to search volume after volume. You could ask questions that we could never ask before from a body of work, from a body of literature. And that was exciting and that was important. Then we moved into this, oh my God, we don't have enough money. How are we going to do all this stuff? And it's this sort of this polygamy, as I call it, or this period of kumbaya where, let's work together. Let's form partnerships. Let's do things on a national level. Let's do things in St. Louis with other academic libraries. And we just sort of rushed out into this period. And therefore, we have lots of partners. Therefore, the polygamous reference here. And now I think we're into this period, what I call parabiosis. Does anyone know what that word means? It's a biological term. Think of a Siamese twin, and where organizations share organs and systems and body parts, if you will. And I think that's where we are today, is we're seeing more and more institutions that are collapsing those centers for excellence, collapsing those mass production operations into shared approaches. One of the ones I was involved in was a project with Cornell University, where we had Cornell University Libraries, CUL, and Columbia University Libraries, CUL, therefore the Too Cool Project. And this was an effort to hire individuals who would work for both institutions in the library. So we didn't need someone doing this at Cornell and same thing at Columbia. They could do it for both institutions. And we're seeing more and more of these bilateral, trilateral, and small multilateral combinations beginning to happen. Therefore, I think it's leading to a period of what I call particularism, where we're going to have individual libraries or groups of libraries that are going to have specific expertise and capacity, where you're going to have libraries that not only have deep collections in a particular area, but also have the requisite technology knowledge and expertise that can be shared with and in service to other institutions. And I think this sort of specificity builds a new approach to collaborative collection development and collaborative service development across our library community. And ultimately, I think it's going to lead to what I call a period of polycentricity. I love these words. This is an anthropological term that was developed arguing that humans did not only develop in that one little place in Africa, but in fact there was humans popping up at different places around the globe. Therefore, the notion of polycentric as opposed to centric. And I believe we're going to see more and more experimentation to me, this is really a testimonial to libraries all over the world beginning to, because we've been able to co-invest our resources, therefore free some resources, we're able to do much higher levels of experimentation at different places in the world and bring those together in a more powerful way, because it ultimately leads to this period of phileticism. And I got this word when I attended an off-Broadway show called Extinction. And in that show, they talk about two types of extinction. First, there's terminal extinction, when a species no longer exists. It disappears from the face of the earth, versus what they call phyletic extinction, when a species evolves into something new, something different, and survives. And to me, this is what our challenge is how do we make sure that we are a species of academic libraries that truly survives? Phyletic extinction. And then I was going to end up here with some thoughts about in summary, some of the key issues that we're facing in terms of our relevance and continuing importance to our faculty and students. And we've covered many of these items. I want to reference a couple of the things, the importance of standards. I was president of the National Information Standards Organization for a while, and I really I drank the Kool-Aid on standards, if you will. The issue of accessibility and support for the print disabled, which to me, only libraries can do effectively. The whole area around human-computer interaction and the importance of gaming and virtual reality in a lot of the disciplines that we work with. The recognition of metadata chaos, cataloging, which is low in quality, not current, not accurate. And this is increasingly the case with born digital information. Also the case with stuff that's getting put into places like Digital Library of America, DPLA, Digital Public Library of America, where you'll see things put in there and the only piece of cataloging is picture. Well, that doesn't help me very much if I want to search that database and find something among tens of millions of items. The whole notion of library as publisher, library as distributor, library as incubator. I think these are all very important as we think about the future. And this is my last slide. I think ultimately we are going to be seen as essential to our university and to our campus decision makers if we can demonstrate as library that we contribute to student success, that we contribute to faculty productivity, that we are an integral part and add to the campus economy, the health, the financial health of the institution, that we represent and advance institutional values, and that we support and build the university reputation. And I'll argue we're only going to be successful if we recognize our virtuality, our virtuosity, and our virtuousness. Winston Churchill there's a library opening up in Washington in a few weeks dedicated to the works of Winston Churchill. Well, one point, George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright, was opening a new play in London, and he wrote a letter to Winston Churchill. And he said, Dear Mr. Churchill, my new play is opening in London, and I really would like you to come to the opening night's performance. And I'm including 2 tickets. One is for you, Mr. Churchill, and one is for a friend, if you have one. Well, Churchill wouldn't let that rest, and he quickly replied. And he says, unfortunately, Mr. Shaw, I have another commitment that evening, and I won't be able to attend the opening night's performance, but I really would appreciate if you sent me 2 tickets to the second night's performance, if there is one. And so that's my parting blow. We want people to continue to see us as central to the work of the campus community, but standing still and behaving in traditional ways I think will not get us there. And so I've tried to plant some ideas of areas of opportunity, areas of mandate, where I think we can make a huge difference in the quality of the institutions that we serve. Thank you.